Hello, welcome to my show, Unapologetic Perspective. I'm your host, T. Rob, and today we're talking about something that everybody knows something about, and that's family. We're going to examine family from the standpoint of what they are here to teach us versus what we feel like we should be receiving from them. Um, this podcast, or better yet, this show, has been years in the making because I wanted to figure out exactly what it was that I wanted to do when I came onto YouTube. And the further I've gotten along in my journey, I realized that as I started my healing process, I didn't want to do anything that wouldn't help other people, that would be salacious, and that would add to an otherwise tumultuous content that's already going on YouTube. I decided while I was out of town, I had an epiphany while visiting family that I would like to talk about how family is here to teach us things versus what it is that we expect to get from family. I was on a trip with my wife where I went to see my father and my sister. And during that time, we were out there. I had a moment where some old feelings came up from my childhood. And when I had that moment, I had to examine where these feelings were coming from. In that moment, I realized something that came to me very clear, that it was something to be learned from my situation with my family that had nothing to do with them. It had everything to do with me and how I felt about myself. I then came home and I talked to my confidant, my wife, about the situation. And as we were going through it, I realized that the most important thing is how you see yourself in this world. So I went back and I talked to my producer about what it was that I wanted to do and what kind of content I wanted to create. And we came up with this idea to talk about self-actualization and how you can heal yourself through figuring out exactly what it is that triggers you, the things that cause you discomfort, the things that bring you pain, and how you can further internalize and get inside of yourself and realize that you can fix the outer world, or basically how you see the outer world by fixing things inside of you. So let's start from the beginning. I was born in 1980, May 24th, in Chicago, Illinois, to my mother, who was from a family that was Baptist. My father was a musician who was also raised by a highly religious family. When I was born, we then moved to California because my father was a musician. Him and his band were planning on making a big break in the music industry, so the entire band picked up and moved to the West Coast. And my mom, my older brother, who was by another, who has a different father than I do, we all moved to California together at the same time, shortly after I was born. About 3 years into my mom and dad being married, they got a divorce. I was 3 at this time, and it was a very tumultuous time in my life. And actually, when I think back to it, it was the earliest memory that I had, my father leaving. I remember my mother had a wicker chair sitting in the living room, and my father was standing in the door, and he was saying that he was leaving, and my mom was crying. It was like my earliest memory. My mom would often tell stories about how when this happened, I started to take things out of her room and keep them in my drawer for safekeeping. And she knew that it had an emotional impact on me. Shortly after that, my brother's father came back into the picture. I was about 4 years old when he returned into my mom's life, and he had just came home from the military. Him and my mom rekindled their relationship, and he became the man in my life. Now, as you can expect, this caused some problems. My father being out of the house and this new man being in the picture caused problems between my mom and him. My stepfather then came back into my life around 1984. My father by this time had a baby out of wedlock while still married to my mom. Around 1985, they decided to finalize their divorce. We stayed in California until I was 11 years old in 1991. And then when my mother and my father lost their jobs at McDonnell Douglas, we then decided to move back to Chicago. This put a great distance between me and my dad, who stayed in California. At this time, he had remarried and had another kid, a son. And so he had 2 kids, by his now current wife, who he had had the baby out of wedlock with. When I was 11 years old, I went back to visit my father and realized that I quickly found myself out of place among siblings that didn't share the same mother as I, and a father who had started a new relationship and was looking to maintain that relationship. This was the most important thing in his life. I felt like an outsider, and there was no shortage of ways that I was shown that I was an outsider. After visiting my father, I went back to Chicago and was back with my father, my stepfather, my brother, half brother, and my mom at my grandmother's house. I found myself trying to figure out where it was that I fit in the grand scheme of things in two families that I didn't seem to be, or I didn't feel like I was important as important as the others. Me and my brother had a seriously strained relationship, as he often took the side of people outside of the family against me. The first fight I ever got into when we moved to Chicago, he actually helped somebody beat me up on my front porch. All of these relationships increasingly persisted to be hard relationships all the way up into my adulthood. A lot of decisions that I made in life were based on the fact that I never felt like I was welcomed, never felt like I fit in, and never felt like I was cared about within my own family. I then started making decisions on my own to have my own kids. At 18, I gave birth. Well, I not gave birth, but my first son was born. A big reason for me, I believe, having kids was that I felt as if I wanted to create the family that I never had in the family I was given. When I was 22, I then had another son, who was also followed up by a daughter from another woman. And by the time I was 25, I had 4 kids. When I do an examination of why it is that I had so many kids, I truly believe that a lot of it had to do with me not feeling wanted. And so I wanted to create the family that I didn't have by having kids. During my adulthood, I came to the realization that my relationships with my family were very important in the way that shaped me seeing the world. I felt vulnerable. I felt oftentimes alone. Even with my kids in my life, I felt alone. I never really had a good relationship with my brother. Our relationship with my father was strained, and we didn't see each other for 15 years until 2007, when we once again got a chance to rekindle our relationship, and at which time the realization that I still didn't fit in hit me. I left and moved away, and on my journey through life, I found myself in tumultuous relationship after tumultuous relationship. It was difficult for me to keep a relationship with women, with friends, and the way I viewed myself was very insecure. All of these things stem from what I believe was the trauma I faced as a child and not feeling like I was wanted and belonged anywhere. As I got older, I decided to make a transition from Cleveland, Ohio to Phoenix, Arizona. Shortly thereafter, I decided I was going to take full custody of my kids, at least 3 of my kids, and I moved them into the house that I was living in Arizona. By this time, I had to make a decision on what kind of man I wanted to be, because I had people who were looking up to me to be somebody for them. I took a job doing air conditioning after going to school for 8 months. My teacher got me into a job where I was an installer. And this is where my character had to come into play. Still suffering with some of the trauma that I had from my childhood, I had to figure out how to navigate corporate life, when previous to that, the only thing I ever knew how to do was be a drug dealer. There was decisions along the way where I could have made the wrong decision, but at this point in my life, I was not allowed to do so because there were people who were looking up to me to make the right decision. I learned a lot of valuable lessons during this time in my life because I was then forced to do what it was that I had to do. Some of those old wounds were still showing themselves in many ways, But now I was starting to learn from all the things that had happened in my life. And I had to realize that no matter what was going on with me, it was time for me to figure out who it was that needed to be so that I can be somebody for somebody else. During this time, the realization finally hit me that everybody in my life up until that point was a lesson for me, good, bad, or indifferent. I could no longer hang on to the pain that I was holding on to and the scars that I had from these relationships and using them as excuses for me not doing what I needed to do because there were people who were dependent on me. I had vowed that I would be a different parent for my kid, and so I set off on a course to do exactly that. A lot of mistakes were made along the way. I said I wouldn't do certain things and I'll be a better father than my father was, and I made a great deal of mistakes while doing that. I tried to provide shelter for my kids, but I was lacking in some areas because I was an only parent. When you're an only parent, there's no way you can cover all of your bases. Where I did provide a home for them, a nice home at that, I was lacking in making sure that they were doing what they were supposed to do in school, emotional support, and several other areas I will now admit are important to the process. Once I realized how difficult it was to be a parent, I then learned in that process that I needed to be able to give other people grace in life. Around 2017, I received a call from my father, who had started going to counseling. He wanted to sit down and have a conversation with me about the things that he had experienced growing up, and the trauma that had been caused to him by some of the things that he had to witness as a child. We talked for about 30 minutes and I allowed him to say everything that he had on his mind. Towards the end of the conversation, he asked me if there was anything that I wanted to say to him or anything that I wanted to get off my chest, at which time I said there was nothing I needed to say, that I'd already resolved all the issues that I had with him within myself. We started our relationship from that point and we've been going strong ever since. You see, me finding healing didn't mean that my father had to come to me as a new man. It meant that I had to start seeing myself differently. Once I saw the value in me, once I realized that I was good enough for myself, I no longer needed that validation from my parents. And in fact, everything that my father had done up until that point, my mother had done up until that point, and my stepfather had done up to that point, was actually there to teach me what it was that I needed to know to become a better man for myself. Once I found the healing within me, I no longer needed for anybody else to validate me. This allowed us to have a better relationship. I later went on to meet a young lady who later on became my wife in 2020. We started a relationship, and that relationship was built on me having healed myself. I was able to come to the table as a healed man with her, which allowed her to start looking at herself through a new lens. Now, she had already been on the road herself of self-discovery. And once we came together, we started healing the parts that hadn't healed up until that point together as a unit. And we've been doing it ever since. So this video was just to talk about how your parents, the people in your life, and every relationship for that matter that you have is not here to validate you, make you feel warm and fuzzy, make you feel good about yourself. It's actually here sometimes to challenge you. The good, the bad, and the ugly is here to challenge you. It's here to give you those things that you need at the moment that you need them. If you look for the lesson in everything in life, you'll find it, but you first have to listen. Second thing that you have to do is listen to the voice inside of you. That voice is telling you something. That voice of fear, that voice of anger, the voice of discontent, the voice of jealousy. When these voices come up, you need to identify them and ask them, what are they here to teach me? Are they valid? Are they helping me? Are they hurting me? If holding on to this is causing more of a burden to you than it is healing you, then you have to ask yourself, what am I getting from this? There's an old saying that goes, drinking poison and expecting somebody else to die is the craziest thing that you can do. Something to that effect. I think I got it wrong, but basically something to that effect, right? Every day that we walk out here and we operate in discontent and anger with other people in our lives that we feel have done us wrong, it's like drinking poison expecting for them to die. I've often had to tell people, when they come to me about situations in their lives with significant others, family members, and things like that. The hate and the anger that you hold on to is only hurting you. The person that you feel this way towards, they may not feel anything whatsoever. But that bitterness and all of that stuff, that resentment that you have inside of you, that's hurting you. It's not hurting them. You have to put those things at rest for yourself, not for them. I know it seems like a weird concept sometimes, putting the past to the past when you feel like you haven't healed the wounds that you feel like they've created, but you have to do it for yourself. If not, those things metastasize themselves in the relationships that you have with other people. They carry through, they show up. And until you heal those things, it makes it very hard for you to have relationships with other people.